Sarit Majumdar hails from Ireland. So let's give him a round of applause and bring him up here. Come on up, Sarit. No one took me seriously when I said,
No.
grab a seat.
I'm sure no one believes I'm Irish.
I'll let you tell them the story, because they looked at me like I was making up some kind of joke.
Well, any group that's committed to drinking tequila on the longest day of the year is a great group, right? So, yeah, I have both Irish and American citizenship because I was born in Northern Ireland, of all places. Now, I left when I was 6 months old, so I kind of lost the accent along the way. But then moved here to the States, to Rhode Island. Obviously, you can tell by looking at me, my parents were from India originally, and they came here, as all immigrants do, to find a better life for their kids. In this case, they had one child, me. And I think I followed their path for a while, and until I decided to become, a businessman.
And I want to pick up on that, because I come from a Greek family, so I could relate to having immigrant parents that want the best for their kid.
Right.
And you went to Yale.
That's correct.
So you obviously were doing great scholastically, school-wise. What did your parents want you to do when you graduated college?
Well, as you guys know, if you know any Indians, there's pretty much like 3 professions you can possibly have if you're Indian, right? You got to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or an engineer. And if you're one of those 3, you're good. If you're anything else, something went wrong. And
Sweet, I actually found this. I guess someone put it up on Facebook. It's just a general meme, but it's like you have to be a doctor as long as you're a doctor or engineer. I couldn't believe that it was out there. It's funny.
That's right. So the first thing I did wrong is, when I got into Yale, my parents were quite proud, but then I decided to major in history, which if any of my kids did today, I'd probably shoot them. But I did that, and then I was on my way. I still thought, okay, I can correct this, and I was on my way to become an investment banker, and I had applied for all these jobs. In fact, the Yale class of 1985 is still, you can Google it and look at it, it's known as the center of the age of greed, because over half of our class applied for investment banking jobs.
Wow.
And I was one of them, and I got an offer, a nice offer, and for some reason I decided that I wasn't going to do it. And I remember calling the guy up, gave me the offer, and said, I won't be coming. And he said, well, where will you be going? Expecting me to say another investment bank or some other consulting company. And I said, I think I'm going to go to Tibet. And I think at that point he must have just hung up the phone and probably called his HR director and said, how did that guy get through this system? But and I ended up going to Tibet, actually.
So I asked you this previously, but were your parents business owners? Because sometimes we have parents that are entrepreneurial. What were your parents?
My mom was a doctor and my dad was an engineer. So that's probably why I didn't want to get near either of them. So in the sense of the profession. So when I decided to I had actually $4,000 saved up from different odd mowing lawns, doing different things. And I had calculated that I could go to Asia, a one-way ticket to Hong Kong, and that should last me anywhere from 10 months to a year. And then I figured that, and this is the cocky 21-year-old saying, I can come back and get that same job, or if not better, so why don't I have fun first? And so I ended up buying a one-way ticket to Hong Kong and decided to travel. And that was the start.
How long were your travels? How long did you travel?
I ended up traveling for 13 months. And during those 13 months, if you do the math, call it 400 days, and $4,000, that's $10 a day. And that includes, trains and buses, not planes, because those are a little more expensive. And I spent 3.5 months of that in China, 3 months in India, Nepal, Thailand, Burma at the time, which is now Myanmar, Malaysia, Singapore. Ended up, once I was like dead broke after the travels, I guess I couldn't call my parents at that time, right? Because I had basically told them that, oh, I'll make it work. So I ended up in Taiwan, because through my travels in China, I noticed that the people there, they even though it was called Communist China, and it still is today, they were as far from communism as anything I could imagine. I mean, the most capitalistic, entrepreneurial people I had ever seen in my life. And so I thought at the time, this was 1985, 86, that, hey, someday the government's going to be off their backs, and there's going to be an opportunity here. So I thought at that time it would be good to learn Mandarin, and at that time Taiwan was the only place that was feasible to do that.
And as a student, because I've always, when someone is graduating, they ask me, what should I do? I tell them, travel around the world now and get to know, what did you get out of that experience, being 21 and telling your parents, hey, I'm going to travel. What did you learn from that?
Well, it's funny because now you see this term gap year all the time. In fact,
millennials do it all the time. It's like a popular thing.
The president's daughter is going to take a gap year before her first year at Harvard, and it wasn't very common back then. But basically, essentially, what I did, and I think it is a good thing, because no 21-year-old, I don't care who you are, knows what you want to do in life and where you want to go. And so by going to China, I think I learned something about myself, which is that I thought, okay, what am I going to become? And I thought always I would end up being a lawyer, because I thought, okay, I'd learn Chinese, practice international law, and it still put me back on the track that you're supposed to be on. And I definitely wasn't going to become a businessman, because I believed all businessmen are crooks at the time. Because that's that mindset. But when I was in China, one thing I understood is, the way that people who really weren't even allowed to have businesses, but you could see they were trying to sell, like, kao, which is like a meat kebab sticks on the street, just to make that little extra money to support what they had. And they were, at that time, you could change money in China. They had an official currency and an unofficial currency. Huh. And it was called FEC and renminbi, which they have today. And if you took the official currency, which foreigners were issued when they gave dollars, and you traded it on the black market, you got 50% more money. But they didn't want foreigners to spend that money. The foreigners were only allowed to spend the other money. So I always would trade with the people on the street and then get that other money. And I would take pride in being able to get away of spending the money that was 50% more for my dollar. And this was the way the Chinese kind of circumvented their entire system. So it was kind of a very interesting time, because I saw, and I guess that's when I realized that maybe this is what excites me, because, doing what I did was taking risks. All of you guys, that's why you're here. You're risk takers, right? You just decided, I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to create an opportunity. I see something that's different, and I looked at China literally at that time as like, there are a billion risk takers here. I mean, they were, you're not at that time to change money illegally for a Chinese was punishable by death.
Wow.
Right, but there are people doing it to make a little extra. To make a little extra for their family. So imagine when they open things up, if they're willing to take that kind of risk, what they're willing to do when they're allowed to take risk.
So talk about the transition. You mentioned that then you went to Taiwan. So why did you go to Taiwan at the time?
At that time, the only place to study Mandarin for a foreigner was Taiwan, because in China, they wouldn't allow you to live with. You could live there as a teacher, but they wouldn't allow you to intermingle with locals. Taiwan was open, becoming democratic. So I spent a year. When I decided to learn Chinese, I said, okay, I need some job to pay for myself, since I didn't have any money at the time. So I taught English a couple hours a day, and that was enough to study Chinese full-time, to study Mandarin. And I could live with foreigners, live with Chinese, I had no exposure to foreigners. I had one foreign friend for the entire year. And about once a week, I would call him just for sanity check and go out and speak English and go have a few beers. And as it turned out, he ended up introducing me to my future business partner.
So talk about how you met your business partner.
So this friend of mine, he was working in a trading company in Taiwan, and he was always telling me, you should really go into this with your language. You should go into business. You should go into trading. And I would to give him the line that you can't. Businessmen aren't to be trusted. I'm going to be a lawyer and straighten out all those crooked businessmen. And he said that, no, you got to do it. And he kept pushing. And then one time he came to me and he said, look, I have met a guy who I'm doing business with. He's a German guy. And I've told him that I know the perfect person to start his business in Taiwan. And it's you. And I said, I'm not going to meet some German guy and start a business in Taiwan. I'm going to law school. And I'd already started my applications. And he insisted. Finally, he basically begged me. He says, look, you got to meet this guy because I put my reputation on the line. If you want to blow him off afterwards, no big deal, but at least don't make me look bad. So I said, okay, I'll go meet this guy, and met him at his hotel. He came out and he showed me a hockey puck. And I'm like, what is this, guys? And the hockey puck had like some wiring on it, and it looked like it had was cut out with like some sort of cellophane. It was weird. And I said, what is this thing? He said, well, when people watch hockey on TV, they can't see the puck. And you got to think of prior to HD TV, 1987. And he says, there's a guy who developed a way to put a light inside that puck, and then you seal it, and therefore when it's on TV, it's kind of got a flashing light. And I'd like to get this built in Taiwan because I know it's low cost and the volume will be high, and that's the project. Those are the kinds of projects I'd like to do. And I thought, that sounds interesting. Is that what business is? Wow, get something. And then I thought, hey, meet people and use my Mandarin and try to source different parts and components and get it done. Hey, this could be fun. So I end up saying, yeah, I'll give it a try. Still in my mind thinking, I'll give this a try for a year, and if it doesn't work, I'll still go back to the States and go to law school. And it's now literally 30 years later, and he's still my business partner today. We own a couple of companies together, two main companies with offices in different countries, and we never did make that hockey puck ever. That never turned out. The first one was as with most of you guys, the first one's usually a big failure, and then you get on to, you find a way, you find a path, and that's kind of what happened to us.
So I'm going to want to go through the highlights of the businesses that you built, but then I want to just make sure it's open to questions, so feel free to text in your questions, because here's a man that does business internationally, and it's being talked about a lot in politics, about all kinds of stuff. If you have a question just about how trade is done, Sarit knows. He does business internationally, so he could tell you the real story. So feel free to ask any question in regards to that. But this is... So then you actually built the business with your partner, and I think I have a slide somewhere there. So you were selling like the components to computers and parts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what started is, in Germany, he and his dad had noticed that the Taiwanese had started to copy connectors. So if you look at the end of those boards, you see those things on there? Those are connectors. And
these things right here?
Yeah, those things right there. And they used to be made only by European and American manufacturers. And today, if you think of Amphenol or Tyco, and you've heard some names like that make those kinds of connectors. Well, the Taiwanese, very entrepreneurial, enterprising, figured out how to copy them and make them almost the same. And in fact, do any of you know what Chinese R&D stands for? Yeah. Well, I like the more tamer receive and duplicate. So, and that's really what they did well. Yeah, that's right. So that's exactly what they did, and they did it very well. Now, once those connectors started to be made, it kind of morphed into cables, because if you remember the old printer cables, and if you remember in the old days when you used to buy a printer at Circuit City or some place like that, which no longer exists, they would sell you the printer, and the retailer would only make like $5-10 on a printer that you would buy for $200 or $300. But that printer cable that you bought for $29.95 cost $3 to make in China. So that's where the margins were, and that was the business we kind of went into over and became a computer accessories distribution company.
So how fast that was in the early 90s, right?
Yeah, so late 80s we started trading. In 1990 because as all of you met a great woman who was coming back to the United States to law school. In fact, she's half Indian, and all of her siblings are lawyers, including her. And so, she was coming back, so I wanted to come back to the States, and that was an opportunity to take this computer accessory business and build it through distribution in the U.S. And so in 1990, that's when I came, and we were at the right place at the right time, because computer accessories, if you think about it, didn't exist until the computer started to be a personal computer. And the history of personal computers really starts in the very late 80s, early 90s, and that's when we were in the accessory business. And that company grew very, very fast.
And those were my high school years, the mid-90s, and I remember my cousin buying parts like this, him and his neighbor, and they would create their own supercomputers because they could do a better job buying different parts. And I just remember, I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm putting computers together. I'm like, how? He goes, you just buy the parts.
Yeah.
Here's the catalog, and you can make your own.
Right.
So you were the one providing a lot of these parts to everybody.
Absolutely, all of those parts. And we would, most of our first and best customers were these mom and pop computer stores. And all they would do, you'd go in and they would build that PC right there. And now, I guess this is your PC, right? So it's changed a lot.
Can you talk about how fast that company grew? Because you happen to have, there was some luck to play, but you were at the right time at the right place, and what you learned from that experience with that first iteration.
Yeah, so that company started in basically 1990, and by 1995 or 96, we were the one of Inc.'s 95, I think it's Inc.'s fastest growing 500 companies in America, and it was really, I don't really attest that to our own ability as much as being in the right market at the right time with the right idea. I think we were young. We made a lot of stupid mistakes, and so if anything, the industry helped us recover from all the dumb things that we did, because and I know some of you are younger, but when you're 24, 25 running a business, you're probably not making the best decisions on everything every day, and we weren't, but luckily we were in the right industry, and that took off, and we rode it up, and we learned because we kept trying to ride it as computer accessories we're no longer a very viable business. And it took us, so there were a few years where we flatlined afterwards, and now we're back more in the digital accessories and that type of thing. So the business is still very solid. We have offices in, I think, 7 countries worldwide, and we still sell to about 90 countries worldwide, these kind of products. But they've morphed into that. No longer is anybody doing that, even though just the other day I met a girl who's graduating from high school, and she was telling me this summer she has a big project. She and her dad are going to build a computer. She was so excited about it. She's like, we got to figure out, we got to get all these parts from the internet.
Yeah, we forget that it was only 10, 15 years ago that people were building their own computers. Now, with Apple doing closed units, no one really opens it up anymore. You go to the store to fix it. Yeah. So you had a transition when your wife, you guys welcomed your third baby.
That's right.
Your third child. Talk about what happened in that moment.
So this company we started with my partner in 1990. We grew it till the year 2000, and at that time, the Taiwan company that I originally had started with my partner has started to grow, but had started to run into some trouble with some management there. And we felt like it was time to, go back and clean that up and professionalize it a bit. So I thought, hey, this could be fun. Now that wife and 3 kids, I would see Taiwan and China from a whole different perspective. You know, it would be fun. So, but I thought, now how am I going to convince my wife? That's not going to be easy, right? 3 kids, going to school, everything, you know. So I thought, well, I can probably do this at a point where she has to say yes, because she won't even know what the question is. So I waited till our 3rd child was born. And I can tell you the date, August 18th, 1999, and we were in Dunedin Mease Hospital. And as soon as she comes out of labor, we have our 3rd child, I said, "Hey, Regina, I got a great idea. Let's move to China."
Your reaction. Oh, God bless your wife.
You know, and they think Donald Trump has a woman problem or whatever. I guess no. So and she said, you know, kind of shocked, "Yeah, well, I guess so." So we did.
But what's interesting is your kids got the experience to grow up in Asia. Where in China did you?
Well,
go
we
to?
went back first to Taiwan because that's where the company still was. So we first went back to Taiwan, and it ceased to be the low-cost manufacturing center because those same Chinese people who I saw as being very entrepreneurial had started to, you know, build businesses and build things, have a much lower labor cost. So China was really the opportunity. We stayed in Taiwan for a couple of years and then eventually moved the entire family to China. And to this day now, I mean, we're so happy we did that for our kids, because our 2 oldest kids speak Mandarin. There's one of them is graduating this year from college. The other is studying. They've worked summers in China. My oldest son is actually going to take a job in Singapore in August of this year. So it's part of their blood. It's part of they're excited by it. And I don't think that would have ever happened if we didn't give them the opportunity. And so we went there, lived in Taipei, and then we lived in Shanghai, which in 2003, living in Shanghai, that was the center of the boom. In fact, I remember when I first got to Shanghai, a friend of mine picked me up as we drove into the city. There was, I've never seen so many skyscrapers being built in my life. I mean, it was just like...
What was the population then when you first got there? Do you remember?
The population of Shanghai is, it's funny. If you read officially, it's 8 million, but when you read unofficially, it's like 25 million.
Yeah, I've seen the reports that they don't even know.
And the reason that it works that way is because the government only certifies you as a local resident if you have lived there. Now, all the people that move in, they can't support them schooling-wise and all the stuff, so they don't get what's called a hukou, which is a resident card. And so so basically, it's 20+ million people when you go there. So when we got to Shanghai, this friend said to me, he said, "You know, half of the high building cranes in the entire world are in the city of Shanghai.
Right now.
Right now, 2003. So I looked at it and I'm like, that's amazing. Now, as it turned out, about 4 months later, I was on a business trip in Dubai. And I flew into Dubai. A friend of mine picked me up. And same thing. I'm looking at, wow, what's going on here? And the guy says to me, he goes, "You know, half of the high business cranes in the world."
I love how they create their own, the locals,
so
they have their own stats.
Okay, there's an urban legend for you there. And I don't know how many people I had told that story to as fact.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So what brought you back from Asia the final time to the Tampa Bay area?
Well, one of the things that my oldest son was going to go into 8th grade, and we had, the company was back stable. We built it back up. We started a couple offices in China itself. And I always felt like when you ask somebody where you're from, and today actually it's easy. Look at your cell phone number, right? Whatever that area code is your typically, if you're young, that's your high school area code, right? So when people ask you where you're from, it's kind of where you graduated from high school, often, and so with my kids, I thought, I can't see them saying that they are from Shanghai. I mean, they're Irishmen like me, so they just don't fit. So I thought, well, geez, so I thought they should come back, and they actually didn't know America. So because if you think about it, they were from age 1 to 7 when they left, and then 7 years later. So I thought it's time to come back, and we had an opportunity then to buy a business that I'm still running today, which is up in Brooksville. So it was the perfect timing to come back to the U.S.
And I think that the concept that business is just a really nice niche that you found. So can you explain the niche that you found within this industry that really allows you to create a really great business here locally?
Yeah. So if any of you are familiar with contract manufacturing, you know companies like Jabil or Sanmina or Selectron, Foxconn that builds most of the iPhones today. Those are large global contract manufacturers. And what that means is when Apple designs the iPhone, they have a set of prints of electronic prints that go with that iPhone, and then the manufacturer builds it to those specifications. Well, there was a company up in Brooksville that was a very small, relatively small company, and they were just manufacturing computer cables when we became involved as partners. And they were struggling because the cable business had all moved to China. So in the case of this company, their largest customer that represented 90% of their sales said, "We want to move everything to China." So they were faced with almost closing down, and they had about 40 people in a small plant up in Brooksville. So the business owner actually, to his credit, decided, I got to do something. I got to go to China to stop this. But he really didn't have a lot of background. He happened to find us. We had, at that time, the computer accessory business that was doing a lot out of China, including manufacturing our own cables. And he came to us. And we took an interest in that company. And then it eventually grew from, 1 million to about 30 million in revenues as we added more and more components to it. And the unique part of that is, when you want something manufactured, most people say, let's manufacture it offshore because it's cheaper. Or no, let's manufacture it in the United States because they'll protect my IP. They won't steal it.
Intellectual property.
Yeah, intellectual property. If I go to China, it's going to be stolen. And I tell people that's true. I don't care what you say,
it will
who
be,
you do
it
it
will
with,
be knocked off.
it will be stolen. You go to China today, there are perfectly good-looking fake iPhones that work like an iPhone. They have fake Apple stores there that sell you fake iPhones. Okay, and
do you know it's fake?
Yeah, it's fake. The people know it's fake, but hey, rather than paying $600, if I can get a $300 fake,
you go into the right,
and and look and have that status symbol that my friends think is an iPhone. So this isn't
wow.
So they will do that. So what we found as a niche is to go to these small and medium-sized companies and say, look, you need stuff to be manufactured offshore because you'll save money. But you also need to make sure they don't steal your stuff, because then you lose your product. So we put a hybrid together where we do partial offshore manufacturing and then do final assembly here, put in the software, put in... If you look at anything, an Apple iPhone is one. There's nothing special about the iPhone except probably a chip that they've developed that has, that controls it. I mean, there's maybe some Gorilla Glass that Corning does for them that's a little bit special. But there's not much else, right? So as long as you can protect those pieces for the smaller business person, that's a great opportunity for them to have low-cost manufacturing and still have control of what's important to them.
And it's great for you because chips are a commodity business. So can you talk about like the margins, Jabil? They're what, a $20 billion a year revenue? What's the revenue?
Yeah, I think
it's a lot.
they're like 20 billion a year. And if you look at their finances, and it's a public company, they play in the 8 to 12, 15% margin range. If they get a big project, they might have to go for 7, 8%, and smaller ones maybe 15. And our margin requirement is more from that 15, 16, all the way up to, say, 25, even up to 30, depending on the project. But we still save our customers a lot of money. So if you have a $1,000 machine and you can take components of it to China we may be able to offer that for $800 and still have a 15 to 20% margin on it, or 25% margin even. So that's kind of the way that industry works. And we get it. We also do it because of our background and working in China. We can get much smaller quantities manufactured in China than most people can, because we have offices there and we're set up there already. So.
And can you talk about the growth? How many people have you added to this company?
Yeah, so when I came...
This is up in Brooksville, just so people know. Yeah.
So you can imagine when the owner announced that he'd sold the company to a guy whose business career was in China, and they were a U.S. manufacturer. I mean, what is everybody thinking? Oh, my God. I mean, we've got months to go before they're going to shut this place down. And at that time, they had a little over 40 people, and today we have about 100 people. So we've more than doubled the workforce by manufacturing a lot of what we do in China, doing a lot of what we do. And interestingly enough, China's getting too expensive. So we do some in the Philippines now, we do some in other countries, because that same thing that happened when we moved from Taiwan to China is moving from China elsewhere. If you look at it today, shoes, T-shirts, things like that, they're no longer made in China labels. You'll read made in Bangladesh or made in Cambodia or places like that.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've heard this from other businessmen that travel to China, but the Chinese are hungry for brands.
Oh,
like they want people to know the prestige that they bought, like a real iPhone. The ones that, like, there's a big hunger for just Polo or the real Polo, not the knockoffs.
Absolutely. If you go, think about this. I was just in New York on Monday, and if you see those great, beautiful stores on Fifth Avenue, you go to a Louis Vuitton store, and if you look in that Louis Vuitton store, there's nobody there, right? There's you might see one customer or something, and I always wondered, how do they do it? How does that math work, business-wise? I mean, what do they sell, one bag a day, and they've got the most expensive real estate in the world? I mean, that can't work, right? Go to a Louis Vuitton store in Shanghai. People are waiting at the counter. I mean, it's unbelievable, because people are, it's the way they can show they've made money. We bought a house in China, and our builder had built a few different houses, and he started to make a lot of money. So he decided to buy a car. The only problem was he couldn't drive.
Wow.
And so he parked his car at his house, in front of his house, just to show his neighbors,
status symbol,
I own a car. Couldn't drive it, but he owned a car. I mean, I used to play at a golf course there. This is a sick story. So there's the hole where they built like a little man-made pond, and the pond it's no. And the guy decides to buy like a 50-foot yacht and put it
in a pond.
In the pond.
Why?
And it's so funny, because you turn this corner and you're at the tee box and you look at this yacht and you're like thinking, I'm inland, aren't I? What is over there? That's it. And it was legitimate. It wasn't a fake yacht. It was a real yacht. The guy spent whatever he spent on it, but that's kind of part of the culture.
Okay, so a lot of questions have come in, so I'm just going to ask you the questions. So Gabe wants to know, what are some of the pitfalls to be wary of in Asian business dealings? Or anything that you would say just be careful of? Or?
Well, one, as I've said earlier, if you have technology, it will be stolen. Okay, just be aware of that. That's all. And you know what? 50 years ago, they said that about Japan. And I think what happens in any culture is they'll steal technology until they start to develop a lot of their own technology. So the Japanese don't do that today anymore. Why? Because they want to protect their own innovation, their own stuff. So that, to me, is one thing. And if you go in and, people will tell you, don't worry about this guy, or this company is bigger, or public company even that you're dealing with, we won't steal it. They will. Okay? And so that's one thing I think you should be wary of.
Okay, another question. Since you didn't do the hockey puck, what was your first product?
Our first product was, you'd have to know, it's called D-sub connectors. So if you had the old printer cable, had a 36-pin Centronics connector on one end and a DB25 connector on the other end. And so those connectors are what we first sold, that were used basically in all printer cables until USB hit. And it was really only until the last 10 years was that cable no longer used. Some of you probably have some in a garage still today.
Bob wants to know, what methodology do you use to determine if a product is profitable or not for you?
Well, interestingly enough, we hired in our business a gentleman that came from 3M in the computer accessory business several years ago, and he showed us a model that 3M uses that we started to utilize, which I thought was great. And it's very simply, you determine what's important about a product. So is margin important to you? Is being leading edge technology important to you? So you rate criteria. And maybe you have 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 of those criteria. And then you rate what is most important of those 10 things. And you give them a number, 1 through 9. 9 being the most important and say 1 being the least important. And then you put a grid across 9 points. So you multiply your most important criteria by 9. And your second most one by 8, and by 7, and by 6, and all the way down. And if it's and then you add the score. Very, 3M does it. So that's how they know whether that Post-its are going to make it, because they figure out what their criteria is. And every business has their own. And that methodology, believe it or not, is the best thing we ever
wow, that's
best gift we ever got, because it quantifies it. Otherwise, you always have people in a room, 3 product managers. One goes, "This is going to sell great." Except they're never going to sell it for you, right? So they're the product manager.
Yeah, they got to send it up to the sales team.
Yeah, and the sales team I don't know what's wrong with those guys.
Yeah, right.
How come they couldn't sell it? It was a great product. This way everybody engages and everybody does the rating, and it works much, much better.
All right, and Bob's question here is, was it difficult making the transition from Taiwan to China from a political standpoint?
No, because China is the most... Yeah, this is going to sound weird. It's probably the freest country I think I've ever lived in my life. Okay, it's not politically free, as we all know. It's not one man, one vote. But it is. You can do anything business-wise. And we bought a house. This shows you how communism versus capitalism. We bought a house in China and went to closing, and for some reason we'd never thought about the property tax. And I'm at the closing table going, "Oh my God, what's the property tax?" And the lawyer announces to me, "It's 5%. And I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me. Did all this 5% a year? He looks at me like, "No, it's 5% every 75 years.
Wow. So you pay it up front right then and there?
You pay it up front, and then you never, there's no property tax bill ever.
Years, wow.
So what my message from it was, these guys haven't even learned how to take advantage of the capitalist system. Another thing the lawyer told us at the closing, he says, "Put the property in your name and your children's name." He says, "Why?" He says, "Because there's no estate law here. So we don't, technically it should go to your children, but there's no law that says that." So, these are kinds of things that we in the West we think we're true capitalists. We're not. I mean, we have so much built in our system that inhibits, I think, business, and so that's what I mean from a business culture, the freest I've ever seen.
Well, how do the Chinese view us as Americans? Do they look up to Americans? Do they want to be like? What's the perception today, current day?
I think the Chinese are very, very positive about Americans in terms of, and that's why they want, if it starts with fashion and cars and different things. Right now, the fastest growing car brand in China is Tesla. Wow. Right? Because it's, even though China has so many knockoff, low-end electric cars now being developed and built, and companies are doing pretty good jobs, but they want, they view that as America as a country that has been successful, that has gone on the right path. Now, the politicians wouldn't say that, but, you've got very few politicians that are kind of, and I think on both sides, that are fearful of one another, or always talk about things being stolen but by rank and file, I've never had any incident where being an American or being a foreigner in China was in any way treated as a negative for me or my family.
Someone sees the picture here of your building. And they're asking, what's that thing, the peanut-shaped outline to the right? Is that it's like a track, or what is that?
Yeah, it's a little walking track. So when we took over this property, we decided we had that extra property we can potentially build another site on. Mm-hmm. So I thought, it would look really bad as just pure asphalt. So I said, let's just build a little walking track there. And one of the ideas one of our employees came up with is, when we might do this, is buy one of these big sails and put them there. Now the problem is it's on a runway to an airport, so I don't know if we'll be allowed to do that but that's it. And by the way, what we're going to do this year is we're going to put solar panels on top of that entire building.
Oh yeah.
And we have done the calculation, done the math. We'll actually get to the point where we can sell back to the grid.
That's
great.
This
is the beauty of living.
How big is that facility?
It's 45,000 square feet.
Gotcha.
And we have also these other two buildings. You see one of them across the street. Those are our buildings too. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of living on an airport is they're not allowed to have trees or shade or a lot of stuff, right? So it's almost
pure
the
sun.
perfect environment for pure sun. So, I mean, it only took us 3 years to figure that one out, but.
So I was talking to you before this, and it's something that you have privy to because you're creating parts. What are some technologies that we might need to pay attention to that you already see is coming out because you're developing the pieces? You and I were talking about driverless cars.
Yeah.
I always tell people my daughter will never have to learn how to drive because her generation, it'll be more dangerous to drive the car than it drive itself.
That's right.
So she's going to look at me like we were nuts driving cars.
Absolutely.
So what are the things that you see around the corner that would just...
So we have different... the driverless car is a good example. So we have a customer that we build... If you go to any traffic intersection, and you probably don't know this because I didn't know it till we started this project. Any traffic intersection, go to Kennedy and West Shore, there's going to be a metal box somewhere at that intersection, one of the four corners. And you're like, what's that metal box? Well, it houses all the electronics to run the traffic lights. So one of the projects we did is, and it was for New York City, was all those metal boxes have boards in it. But the boards, of course, weren't built with wireless technology, right? Why would they have done that, 50 years ago when they put the traffic lights up? They're old, mechanical boards. Now they're changing. And that's one of the ways where a driverless car is going to be able to go through that intersection and see green, yellow, red, where they are in relationship to the box. So all that stuff is going to be stored. So we kind of see stuff like that. My favorite story is, and you can Google this company, it's a company called Sprinkler Magician. So, and he's local. I think he's in Clearwater. So he decided that, why is it that everybody in their lawn, they have to fertilize or they have to put bug spray and so every time you have a guy who does your lawn guy doesn't fertilize for you anymore like the old days.
It's all separate niches.
It's all separate.
Everything.
He's like, this doesn't make sense. You've already got a sprinkler system that reaches everything. Why can't I use that? So he developed this, it's a board, and this is a great example. So the board has this technology that grabs your sprinkler system for seconds. It might grab it for 30 seconds. And it mixes it with whatever chemical. So he can put, mosquito spray in there, and he uses all natural stuff, or he can put fertilizer in there, or in fact, he's selling deer repellent to people up north that don't want deer on their lawn. And that's all done with a unit that's going to people's houses. So with new construction, this is great. And it's a very simple idea. Now, the metal, all of the piece parts of that most of it can come from China. What is never goes to China is the board with his proprietary chip and his proprietary technology. And so that's the kind of stuff you see all the time. And it's small company. I mean, the guy started and he just recently got the sandals contract for all the sandals.
The resorts,
The resorts, because of the Zika virus.
So this brings. I know this is what a lot of people are thinking. How does a small company like that, do they come to you and say, I have this idea, and then do you help them? Or how do they go engineers and then they come to you, sell a couple prototypes?
Usually for us, we are design build, so we have engineers, but our engineers are more manufacturing engineers. So if you come to us with a concept and it's not quite right, they might help you make it a little better, but we don't design the product.
So you have to have something, design it.
You have to have something designed and something brought to us, and then we can probably take it from there to make it more manufacturable. But and it's amazing the ideas that are out there, and I'm sure all of you have. When I tell the story of the sprinkler, half the people go, I thought of that. I thought somebody should use that, you know, and this guy just did it.
That's amazing. I want to also acknowledge another innovator in the room, Ron Klein, the gentleman that actually created the magnetic strip for the credit card. So if you've ever used a credit card, he's in the front row. Just want to make sure, give him a round of applause. Yeah. So it's really great to have, we're a hub for innovation. So my last question for you is, where do you see manufacturing in the U.S. kind of expanding, and how do you see the Tampa Bay region formulating, you know, with Jeff Vinnick really putting money into downtown and really developing our area? What do you see for the future?
Well, I think, first of all, manufacturing is going to be strong in the U.S., but it's not going to be, like, I'll give you clothing, right? So if you go now, there's a lot of things, they call them wearables. They're putting sensors and chips on, you know, athletic wear, so that you know what your heart rate is, you know how much you sweat and water loss and all that stuff. Well, nobody's gonna sew that fabric in the United States typically, but that sensor is being developed by U.S. companies. You know, your Texas Instruments or companies like that. So the value of that product, when you go to buy that shirt and you pay, you know, $59 for a smart shirt. Well, why are you paying that? The T-shirt itself, the value of the cloth is only a couple of bucks made wherever it is in the world. But that sensor has a $20 value. So U.S. manufacturing is alive and well. I mean, we want to get the most value that we can out of something that's more machine intensive, because we don't have an unlimited labor force anyway. I mean, we're a big country, but we don't have 800 million people that we can, you know, that can do labor as India would or as China would. So I think manufacturing is well, as long as we understand that we just have to get smarter with technology and develop more innovative things, and then we'll always be ahead of the curve.
Sarita, I just want to thank you for your time of educating us what's going on, sharing your story. It's an amazing American / Irish / Chinese, everything. You got everything, but you know, truly an American story of all the things. And just give you a round of applause. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.